So welcome everyone. As I mentioned just a moment ago, if you have any questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat. We are recording this program today and it will be posted on our website, and we'll have more information about that at the end of the program. So welcome everyone. Tonight we are thrilled once again to be hosted by the Napa County Library, and I'm going to let the library representative Stephanie chat with you for a moment. She's got some great books to recommend. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you, Yvonne. Welcome, everyone. If you have struggled to keep your garden pest-free, this book, The Guide to Humane Critter Control, Natural Non-Toxic Pest Solutions to Protect Your Yard and Garden by Teresa Rooney, has safe, non-toxic remedies to protect your garden. There's a great appendix which identifies the pest, and it also gives you a list of solutions, and it also refers to the section in the book where you can find more information. It's a good starting point to gain information on how to control the critters that enjoy your garden. We also have Deer Proofing Your Yard and Garden by Rhonda Massingham-Hart. This book provides solid, in-depth advice on defending your yard against deer. She shares the latest research on deer behavior and food preferences, as well as her own hands-on experiences on how to cope with the deer in her yard. And these books, they can both be found in our Home and Garden section at the Napa County Library. And we have many more materials in there for your gardening needs. So please come on in and check us out. And now back to our program, Vertebrate Pests in the Garden.
Thank you, Stephanie. I am going to turn it over now to our guest speakers today, which is Lonnie and Lonnie. So we've got a two Lonnie team for you today to talk about vertebrate pests in your garden. So go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne. And thank you all for joining us this evening for our talk on vertebrate pests in your landscape. So of the two Lonnies, I'm Lonnie Payne, and I'm joined by my colleague and partner, Lonnie Clark. So we are the UC Master Gardeners of Napa County, and our mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices to the residents of California, and be guided by our core values and strategic initiatives. We are non-paid volunteer educators. We undergo an intensive 80+ hour training program. We stay up to date on current UC research and gardening information. So if you are curious about wanting to become a master gardener, this is some of the information that we are presenting to you. We'll have one in-person meeting. So it's an informational meeting, which is scheduled for Saturday, August 20th. And if you can't make that, you can participate in one of the 3 Zoom meetings that we have on August 12th. August 12th, September 8th, and September 21st. I'll go to the next slide, which talks about the joining us. And I mentioned that we have information here that if you would like to take a snapshot, you can do that and get for additional information. So to help serve you better, if you will, in about 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to be receiving an email, and it's just a very brief survey, which will take about 10 minutes. And if you fill out that survey, it helps us to better tailor our programs, to better suit some of the topics and ideas that you might like to see us present. So please, when you see that come in the email, if you would be so kind, please fill out the survey. So Lonnie, what
Yes, here I am. What we're going to cover tonight is basically a variety of pests that you probably already have some familiarity with. We're going to give you an overview of what integrated pest management is and show you how to use it in controlling a number of animals in your garden. The animals we're going to be talking about all have internal skeletons, which makes them essentially different from insects or mollusks, which are the other major animal pest groups with whom or with which gardeners contend. We're going to be talking about deer, birds, gophers and moles, squirrels, rats, and voles. If we haven't listed your garden nemesis, don't be disappointed, because the principles we're using can be applied to other animals, although specific remedies can and do differ. The third thing we'll cover is an easy way to find reliable information that will help you deal effectively with the critters that pop up in your garden. Next slide, please. So, integrated pest management. Maybe you've heard about it and you don't know exactly what it is. It's a process that stresses using the least damaging control method available to successfully address your pest problem. It's defined as an ecosystem-based process for solving pest problems, and it's designed to minimize risks to people, non-target organisms, and our environment. There is a specific process that you go through when using integrated pest management, and it starts with correctly identifying your pest. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's a little more confusing. And we'll talk about some ways to tell animals apart. Once you've identified it, you have to monitor the pest activity. A little bit may be okay, and a lot may be bad, and finding the point at which you feel you need to act is important. You need to establish guidelines for when control is needed, and then actually take the preventative action by applying a control tool. It might be a trap. It might be some sort of habitat modification. Maybe it's some sort of pesticide. We'll take a look. After you're done, you want to assess the effectiveness of the control you have applied. Next slide, please. So, what's a pest? Most vertebrate pests are just trying to make a living, which in their case means getting enough to eat and feed their young. They're creatures of opportunity, and your garden provides that opportunity. You can't always expect to eradicate them, but you can make it so difficult to successfully forage on your property that they go elsewhere. As someone once noted, you don't need to have the best pest proofing in the world. It just needs to be better than your neighbors. Pests damage or interfere in the garden with desirable plants. So they may structurally damage it, they may eat it, but it's when they're interfering with your crops, we have a problem. Sometimes they carry disease. Often they're just a nuisance, though, like this cute little squirrel. Next slide. We're going to start with deer. There are two common native deer species in the Napa Valley. One is the Columbian black-tailed deer, and the other is a mule deer. They were here long before we were, and they've adapted successfully to our presence. That having been said, the urban wilderness interface really isn't their fault. Nevertheless, even animal lovers may resort to controls after losing a number of landscape plants to deer. Barriers are the most efficient way of dealing with them. They're more effective than chemical deterrents and easier on both the deer and the environment. Deer are active at dawn and dusk. They're browsers that prefer semi-woody plants, but they will eat leaves, shoots, and small limbs from trees. They'll eat almost everything, up to about 5 feet off the ground. And they'll take your soft plants right down to the ground. Males use trees to rub antler velvet off in summer, and that can really damage trees, especially young ones. Next slide, please. So how do you know if a deer did it? Well, picture on the left is a deer hoof print. They're not very big. There's a penny there for scale. They're about 2.5 to 4.5 inches long. If you see deer print, congratulations, you have deer. The second slide, the one in the middle, is a picture of very common deer damage. They took this woody little branch and took it down to nothing. If you still don't know if you have a deer, you can refer to the picture on the right, which is deer scat. It looks kind of like a rabbit poop, except it's bigger. Next slide, please. So what do we do about deer? The first thing you can do is try to plant things that the deer aren't wild about. There are a large number of deer-resistant plantings, and you can find a list of them probably in that book that Stephanie held up about backyard deer. But you can also just Google UCANR deer-resistant plants and get a beautiful list. Sunset also has a list that's good. Oleander and a few other shrubs are actually poisonous to mammals, but many plants on deer-resistant lists are just less palatable. And if food is scarce, those plants may still get eaten. Deer fencing is super effective, but remember that the deer are as likely to go under it as over it. It needs to be 8 feet tall, and you should definitely secure it at the bottom. They can squeeze under very little space. If you do put in deer fencing, try to include a gate or a door of some sort. So if you do get a deer trapped inside, you have a way to let it out. You can also use deer fencing on individual trees and shrubs with the same height recommendation. What about fright? Well, dogs, sprinklers, and noisemakers are all possible deterrents, but effectiveness may fade as time goes on. The deer become acclimated fairly quickly to devices and even to dogs. Chemical repellents work by making plants taste bad, but they are best applied before any damage occurs, and they need to be reapplied frequently. They're ineffective when food is scarce, and their effectiveness is questionable overall. Depredation. Depredation means killing the animal. Deer are classified as game animals. You cannot shoot them without a permit, and you are not allowed to poison them. And the chance that I can't think of a place on the Napa Valley floor where you would actually be allowed to shoot a deer. But if you are so inclined, discuss the matter with Fish and Game. They'd love to talk to you. And they can give you all the details. Next slide, please. I want to talk about birds for a couple of minutes. Here are 6 common Napa Valley bird pests. The sparrow, the house finch, the scrub jay, the yellow-billed magpie, the crow, and the European starling. Birds are important in the landscape. They disperse seeds and they eat insects, among other things. Some people just resign themselves to sharing fruit and nut crops with birds, while others decide that it's worth it to put up nets or use other deterrents to keep them away from the crops. Netting and row covers provide the best protection against birds, at least here in the Napa Valley. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of pictures of bird damage. If you have a fruit tree, this is old hat for you. Birds puncture the fruit and just go for it. And it's rendered pretty much inedible and certainly unsalable after they do so. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of an almond tree. On the left, you can see that birds have stripped about the top third of the tree of all its nuts. The picture on the right shows you the damage they do when they actually get the nuts and open them up. Again, you can't use that for anything except more bird food. Next slide. Crown sparrows are 6 to 7 inches long, so they're small birds with a pink or a yellowish bill. They feed on seeds and shoots of young plants, as well as fruit and nut trees, and they like berries. They are migratory, non-game birds, and they require a permit for removal. House sparrows, which are different from crown sparrows. House sparrows are an invasive species and can be removed without a permit. And their head markings are different. I don't think they have striped heads. Next slide, please. This is a house finch. As their name suggests, they're highly adapted to urban environments, and they feed in flocks. They're really little. They're only 5 to 6 inches long. And the males have orange or red markings on their head and chest. The females are just kind of brown. They damage fruit and nut trees, grapes and berries, and vegetables. You cannot remove them without a permit. Next slide, please. This is a scrub jay. And you can see, unlike a blue jay, he doesn't have a crown on his neck. He's got a flat head. He's big, 10 to 12 inches long, with blue wings and tail. Scrub jays usually feed alone or in pairs. They're fairly aggressive. They feed on opening flowers of fruit and nut trees, especially in backyard settings. You cannot do anything to remove them without a permit. Next slide. This is a crow. The crow is a good sized bird, 1.5 to 21 inches long, chunky and pure glossy black. Crows are gregarious. They often feed in large numbers, and they're quite smart. They've been documented using tools to solve problems. They feed on ripening fruits and nuts. Crows can be taken by property owners or tenants if they are damaging crops. Next slide, please. This is a magpie, also big, almost as big as a crow. Noisy and aggressive, very easy to identify. They're black with white markings and have bright yellow bills. They feed in small flocks, and they like ripening fruit. You do not need a permit to remove magpies. Next slide. This is a European starling. Starlings are only appear to be spotted in the spring. Later in the year, those feathers grow out, and the starling is mostly black. 7.5 to 8.5 inches long, and they feed in very large numbers on ripening fruit, and they prefer habitat with lots of tree cover. They are an invasive species and can be lethally removed at any time. Next slide, please. So birds, what do we do? Well, lots of people try fright devices. That's things like noisemakers, mylar strips, and kites that look like predators. They're not effective for more than a week or so because the birds get used to them quickly, especially the crows, jays, and magpies. So if you use them, rotate the type of device used to keep up the element of surprise. Netting is much more effective. 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch nylon netting suspended on frames is very effective. The drawbacks are the cost of the netting, the fact that it's time consuming to install, and it's inconvenient if you have to take it off to work on your trees. Chemical repellents may be effective depending on the species of bird and the tree in question. Depredation, again, it varies. Shooting is effective, but there are lots and lots of regulations, and you can't shoot birds in an urban setting. We encourage you to find a less damaging control method. Shooting is a poor strategy for most of us. That having been said, crows, magpies, and starlings are not protected by game law, but almost all migratory wild birds are. Always check with the California Department of Fish and Game before killing birds. I think it goes back to you now. Oh, no, it doesn't. Next slide. I want to tell you about moles and gophers. That's a mole on the left and a gopher, pocket gopher on the right. Moles are insectivores. They don't normally eat plants, but their tunneling damages roots and turf. They're 6 to 8 inches long. And if you look at that little mole, you can't see its eyes You can't see any ears. They're almost invisible. He's rarely seen above ground, but excavation mounds and tunnels are often visible. And look at the size of those front paws. That comes in handy when you're digging tunnels. They are solitary animals. Move your eyes over to the right and take a look at the pocket gopher. If you look at his cheeks, see how big and chubby they are? Those are the pockets that his name refers to. They are rodents and they eat rooted plants, flowers, and vegetables. 6 to 10 inches long, depending on species, visible eyes and ears, and active day and night. Next slide, please. Moles and gophers both make mounds. Mole mounds are circular and kind of look like little volcanoes from the side. They may have an earthen plug visible in the middle. A gopher hole, on the other hand, is semicircular or crescent shaped, and the tunnel plug is usually on the side. So that's a good clue in terms of figuring out which of these animals you're dealing with. Next slide, please. The other clue is a mole tunnel. If you see one of these, a raised tunnel going across soil or turf, it's probably a mole feeding tunnel. Next slide, please. So with moles, one is often enough to initiate control because damage is unsightly. Trapping is very reliable, and traps have to be set underground because that's where the moles hang out, and it needs to straddle or be suspended above the tunnel, and it's got to be in a deep tunnel. That tunnel we were just looking at that was visible above ground, that's a feeding tunnel, and that's not what you want. You want to get down into its burrow, and we find those by probing the soil with a soil probe. Research has not shown that mechanical deterrents are effective. Moles just move to a different part of the yard. Poison baits may be effective, but make sure you get one specifically for moles. Rodent baits won't work because they're grain-based, and moles don't eat grain. Next slide, please.
So what's the best way to get rid of the mole? Kill trap. And this is an example of a kill trap. Trapping is one of the most reliable methods. You set traps underground, and in this case, it's straddling or suspended above the tunnel. And you set the trap in a deep tunnel by probing the soil, which is what the other Lonnie mentioned.
What do you do if you have gophers? One gopher, like one mole, may be too many. They can damage drip irrigation and girdle tree trunks by eating bark. And they also eat many plants. The good news is that exclusion works. You can either buy wire baskets at a garden store to put your plants in, or you can make your own. If you do that, you use hardware cloth to fashion a container for your plants. Or you can also use hardware cloth when you're planting raised beds. If you line the bottom and sides of it with hardware cloth, you will keep gophers at bay. Some predators, owls, cats, and dogs all eat gophers. It's a question of how many gophers you have and how many predators you have. Gopher traps. Lonnie will show you a few of those from his grizzly collection. You want to use one for each tunnel, or you can try toxic bait. If you use bait, it must be applied in a main tunnel to be effective. It can only be used underground. You might try fumigation or flooding. The problem with flooding is that if you do flood a gopher, it's going to pop up and you have to be ready to kill it right away, or it'll just run back down into another hole. Fumigation is something that is best left to professionals. Over to you, Lonnie.
All right, so here are some of the types of gopher traps. The first one is designed so you set it up with your foot. You simply step down on the lever until it clicks. The second one is similar, but you need to use your hands to set it. Both use the metal bar. And once again, since these kill, be careful when you use them because the same mechanism that can snap the neck of the gopher can do damage to your finger or fingers. The third one uses a cable to kill the gopher. And again, be careful because if they can do damage to the gopher, they can hurt you. So let's talk about my buddy here, the squirrel. There are two types of squirrels that we see, which are the tree squirrel and the ground squirrel. The tree squirrel is very easy to identify from the ground squirrels because of their long bushy tails. They also don't have markings and they escape by climbing trees. Tree squirrels do not hibernate and are active year-round, mostly early morning and late afternoon. This particular fellow visits me quite frequently. And he's very photogenic. Some of the common tree squirrels that we have in California, we have the eastern fox squirrel, sometimes called the red squirrel. We have the eastern gray squirrel. We have a western gray squirrel, and we have a Douglas squirrel. The Douglas squirrel is also called a chicory, and it's usually found in the conifer forested regions of our state. This delightful squirrel here was taken by one of my neighbors who happens to be on this meeting tonight. And she has a beautiful persimmon tree, and he just helps himself to her persimmons with no shame. He stays long enough so we can take a great picture of it. So what are some of the damages caused by tree squirrels? They cause a substantial nut loss due to feeding and hoarding. They damage fruit trees by gnawing the fruit. They feed on a variety of fruits, nuts, and other crops. They can dig holes when they bury their nuts, acorns, and other seeds. And this is very common when you see that they are in your planters because they don't care whether they're doing it in a planter or they're doing it in the ground. They can also destroy lawns in the fall by caching the food in the holes, which can also tear up a well-groomed yard. The other thing they do is they leave these little seedlings, which you get all of these volunteer trees coming up. This particular sunflower is one of my giant sunflowers that I have a battle every year to figure out whether or not the squirrels will get to it. And as you can see at the very top portion of this, the squirrels got to the top and they decided that it was very delicious to eat. Let's talk about the ground squirrels. There are two common ground squirrels in California, and they are usually not separately identified. They're just commonly called ground squirrels. How can you tell the difference from a ground squirrel and a tree squirrel? Look at the tail. That tail is not as bushy as the tree squirrel. Also, look at the coloration. It's brown with some white markings, and there's a white ring around each eye. Ground squirrels are very active during the day. They damage food-bearing and ornamental plants. They're primarily herbivorous. They hibernate in the winter, and actually, sometimes if it's very hot in the summer, they will go into a dormancy, which lasts for a day or a couple of weeks if it's really warm. They only produce 1 litter per year. What is this? This is the burrow system of a ground squirrel. These burrow systems are within 2 to 3 feet of the surface of the ground, but they can occasionally go down 6 feet or more in depth. The burrows can be single tunnels or complex branching systems. They can be occupied by a single squirrel or occupied by many. Ground squirrels are native to California. The state classifies them as a non-game animal, which means you can trap and kill. And you notice I said trap and kill. You can't trap and release. Some people will get live traps and take them someplace to release them. Well, it's really not legal to do that. What kind of damage do they do? Well, this is a picture of an avocado. They can damage roots. The ground squirrel's burrows can divert irrigation water. And they've also been known to cause severe damage to levees in places where, and other types of water retention systems. They gnaw on fruit and bark. They girdle trees and scalpel limbs. And they're capable of girdling and killing trees or vines in a relatively short time. So, control methods. This picture is a picture of a walnut tree that one of my neighbors has this metal protective barrier so that the squirrels can't climb up the tree. It also works well for raccoons. So, what are the control methods? Well, we have traps. There's the mechanical kill or the trap and release. You can shoot when and where legal, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. You can prevent, try not to plant things that attract. So for the ground squirrel, you don't want to have dense ground coverings that provide hiding. And for a tree squirrel, you don't want to have the trees planted close together or with branches of the trees on your house, because it makes what I call a squirrel highway. They can just travel all around that. Bait and poison, which is illegal. And you can always introduce predators such as cats and dogs. I have 3 dogs. They've yet to kill a squirrel. So maybe your dogs are a little bit more predatory than my dogs are. So when we talk about squirrels, they are hard to eradicate. The eastern fox squirrel, or also called the red squirrel, can be trapped and killed. Even though it's considered a game animal, it can be trapped and killed at any time without a permit. That's not the same for the gray squirrels. The eastern gray and the western gray, you have to get a permit, and Fish and Game will tell you how to dispose, whether to kill, or this is one of the few times you might be told to release. But once again, Fish and Wildlife will tell you, Game and Wildlife will tell you exactly how you need to handle that. Let's talk about traps. The trap on the left is a live trap. Problem with the live trap, if you catch it, you got to kill it. The other trap that I'm showing there is a tube trap, and tube traps are lethal. They can be baited or unbaited, but they really are effective in helping to destroy the squirrels that you can. Once again, remember, primarily red, you got to have permits if you're going to try to eradicate your gray squirrels. You could also, if you do do a live capture, methods of euthanasia such as gassing with carbon dioxide or shooting are the 2 methods to kill that squirrel if you get it, put it in a live trap. Let's talk about rats. So there are 2 types of rats. There's a roof, a Norway rat, which is active mostly at night, or all rats really are active mostly at night. Roof rats, sometimes called black rats, are a little bit smaller than the Norway rats. Unlike the Norway rats, their tails are longer than their heads and bodies. The roof rats favor attics, trees, and above ground locations. They're very good climbers. They usually live in nests above the ground in shrubs and trees and dense vegetations. So we all know this, but rats transmit parasites and disease to other animals and to humans. While that roof rat is sleek and agile with a gray or white belly, when I show you the picture of the other rat, you can tell there's a body difference. Rats love citrus, fruits, nuts, and normal foods. Let's talk about the Norway rat, which is sometimes called the brown or sewer rat. It's larger than the roof rat. It's robust with a belly that is mostly gray. The Norway rats favor basements, wood piles, and the ground floor of buildings. Their burrows can be found along building foundations, beneath rubbish or wood piles, and in moist areas in and around gardens. You can have both rats in as a problem because the roof rats will stay at the top portion and the brown rats will be on the bottom. They do not inbreed. As a matter of fact, the brown rat, which is larger, normally will kill a roof rat if there's a fight. So what are some control strategies for rats? A successful rat control strategy has 3 elements. Sanitation measures. Good housekeeping in and around buildings will reduce available shelter and food sources. Collect your garbage, trash, and garden debris frequently, and by all means, keep a very close lid on your garbage. Building construction and rodent proofing. Really, when we talk about that, we're talking about excluding and blocking off entrances where the rats can come in. Seal cracks and openings. That's one of the best ways to rodent proof your house. And then there is population control. Population control, just like some of the other rodents we've been talking about, there's trapping, which is the most reliable method. You can get a rat-sized snap trap. And I mentioned, say, rat size because a mouse trap will not kill a rat. It needs to be a larger snap trap. Some people will use electrocution traps, and they work. They're more expensive than the basic traps. So it's a cost issue there, but they work. Glue boards. Glue boards are one of the least humane ways that you could try to kill a rat. Because with glue boards, if the rat gets a limb on the glue pad and is trying to move itself, sometimes it can damage or break a bone. It's just not a quick way to kill the rat. We talk about live traps. Live traps really aren't preferred because the rat must be killed or released outdoors, which is not recommended because of the diseases. And then the rodenticides, which are the toxic baits, are out there and they're numerous. But we always say if you're going to go in that direction, you might want to consider talking to an exterminator, a professional. Rats are easily frightened by unfamiliar or strange noises, such as you can use high frequency and ultrasonic sounds, but ultimately they become ineffective for controlling the rats. Rats also have an initial aversion to some odors and tastes, but unfortunately, no repellents have been found to solve a rat problem for more than a very short time. And then you could also consider smoke or gas cartridges, some type of fumigation. And of course, these are registered and sold for controlling burrowing rodents. The problem here is that you don't want to do this around your home because if you unleash a smoke or gas cartridge that goes under your house, those fumes can also come up into the residence. So Norway rats can be drowned to flush from their burrows by flooding them with water from a garden hose, but they can also, of course, escape out there then. So maybe flooding is not the most effective. And then again, predators such as cats and owls will eat rats and mice. But as Lonnie mentioned, predators sometimes aren't able to keep up with keeping the rodent numbers down. The last thing we'll talk about is if you have outdoor animals, cats, dogs, if you leave food out and your dogs or cats don't eat all the food, it becomes great pet food for the rats. So if you do that, you want to keep your pet food picked up if your cats or dogs aren't eating it. There's my rat trap. It's the most effective way to help with eradication. And normally, if you have one rat, you have more than there is at least one or more around. So when you use the rat traps, remind yourself that you might want to have set a few traps as compared to just setting one. Next, we're going to talk about voles, also called meadow mice. There are 6 species in California, but only 2 of those species do the most damage: the California vole and the montane vole. Of course, voles are mouse-like rodents. They spend most of their time below ground. Their chewing damage is above ground at the base of plants. You see more of the California vole than you do the montane vole, because the montane vole tends to inhabit the northeastern section of California and the eastern Sierra Slope. Voles have runways. This looks a lot like the runway that we were looking at for the ground squirrel, except these are sizably smaller because the vole is smaller. The runways connect numerous shallow burrows. There's usually a protective layer of grass ground that covers or hides the runways, but I've seen these types of runways in open fields without grass cover. If there's nothing to disturb the vole, then they will infest that area. But you can always locate a runway by pulling back overhanging ground cover. And again, their damage is they chew above ground at the base of plants. They feed on a variety of garden plants. They're primarily herbivorous. They damage your turf and landscape plantings. They gnaw the bark of fruit trees, and they can be the cause of tree girdling. What about some of the control methods? The California Fish and Game Code classifies voles as non-game mammals. The owner or tenant of the property has permission, though, to control them at any time in any legal manner. Again, you can kill them, but you can't release them. So to prevent vole damage, you need to manage the population in your area before it reaches high numbers. The one thing that I like to remind people when I talk about this is that even when you have voles, and once again, voles reproduce, the females reach maturity after a month, and they can have 5 or 6 litters, but voles normally last about a year. So they have a very short lifespan. You can help reduce the number by reducing your vegetation cover, making the area unsuitable for the voles. Once your vole numbers begin to increase rapidly, they do a lot of damage to ornamental and garden plants. So, control methods. There's habitat modification, remove the brush, the heavy mulch, and dense vegetation. There's exclusion. It means to put up a fence, about a 12-inch fence above ground with hardware cloth or some type of wire that will prevent them from going through. You can trap them. And when you trap voles, you use a mouse trap. And once again, just with rats, if you see one, there's more around. So you want to set more than one trap out. You can also bait them. But if you're doing this around areas where you have pets, some of the items used for baiting can be harmful to your pets. And also, predators are important. Coyotes, foxes, owls, they're all good for helping. And we talk about natural control, that's using the predators, and it depends, which is one of our favorite words, but that sometimes can help get your numbers down if you have an area where there are plenty of owls. Other control methods, we talk about fumigants, which are less effective. And the reason why that's the case is if you put something in the burrow of the vole, there are many different ways that fumigant can get out of the burrow. So it's not that effective. Lonnie, what do we have here?
More friends. On the left, we have an opossum. In the middle, we have a striped skunk. And on the right, we have a young raccoon. You can trap opossums, skunks, and raccoons, or you can deter them with fencing or other barriers, which is a whole lot easier. As we've told you several times now, you can't just trap and relocate most wild animals just anywhere. So you must track with either the Department of Fish and Game, or in the case of these guys, you can call county animal control to see what they recommend doing. And animal control, if you have a problem with these 3 backyard visitors in particular, I believe county animal control may lend you traps, and they do have a trapping officer. And I don't, I don't think he'll come out and set your traps, but I think county animal control may help dispose of them. And unfortunately, if they trap these animals, they're probably going to dispose of them by killing them. So better if they just don't come in your yard. And you do know, if you were to set a trap, say for a raccoon, raccoons are fairly vicious when threatened in cages, and I speak from personal experience. So this is consider getting a little professional help if you've got a bad raccoon problem. Raccoons and opossums are primarily interested in your compost piles and your yard waste bins, especially if you put your kitchen garbage in them. So you can modify your backyard habitat, and that's effective. Lonnie covered this thing. So real quickly, keep the pet food dishes inside, especially at night. Secure the garbage. Remove the wooden brush piles. Erecting a short fence around your vegetable plots may be very helpful in keeping the average skunk and opossum out. It will not keep a raccoon out, though. Make sure that you screen your house access points to keep them from denning in your crawl space. Next slide, please. Oh, back one. So we told you we were going to give you a 3-word solution to most of your pest problems. And here's the 3-word solution: Pest Notes Library. Next slide, please. You can either search for Pest Notes Library in any search engine, just UC Pest Notes Library. We'll pull it right up. Or you can find it on our webpage. The screenshot on the left shows you the Napa County UC Master Gardener's webpage. And about halfway down, I've highlighted an area that says Healthy Garden Tips. And that's what you want to click on. And when you do, you'll see the page that we have a screenshot of on the right with a list of gardening resources. And towards the bottom on the left-hand side, you'll find a link to the UC IPM Pest Notes Library. The library covers all sorts of garden pests, including those we've covered tonight. Almost all the information we've provided to you came from those pest notes. There's no easier way to get accurate, science-based solutions to your pest problems. Next page. This is just a close-up of the Pest Notes Library, and you can see it covers a lot of different animals, everything from aphids to wild turkeys. Next slide, please. You can find this slideshow and all of the resources that we've just mentioned, as I said, on our webpage. And here is the link: napamg.ucanr.edu. Next slide. When you get to that webpage, you will see a header up at the top that lists events, find us. And if you click on that, you will bring up a page that will directly link you to our slides and workshop references. Next slide. Oh, Lonnie, you filed these, right?
Yes, yes, yes. These are all of the resources that we use to develop this talk for you. And as you can see, it's very extensive, but it covers all of the animals we talked about. We also included a link for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we also added a link for the Napa County Trapper. So with this set of references, you can find a lot of the information and more details than we even covered this evening. And with that, I will say, where are our questions?
So there were quite a few questions that came up in the chat. I think many of them have been answered, but there were a couple of questions here. There was one about espalier trees being damaged by squirrels, and they were asking if you were going to cover squirrels, and you did. I hope that's enough information to talk about trapping squirrels and eliminating squirrels or keeping them off. One thing you didn't mention is that they do jump really well. So even if your trees are not touching, they can often jump, 4 or 5 feet across between trees as well. So there was some other questions in here.
Yvonne, there was one, hi, this is Jane. There was one comment regarding the crows. And it is true that they are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is enforced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. However, here we have a caveat. Under federal regulations, crows can be killed without a hunting license or permit when caught threatening or damaging trees, agricultural crops, livestock, or wildlife. So I think, as both Lonnie and Lonnie have said, is always checked with Fish and Game Wildlife Services.
Yeah, a lot of these pests are, if they're doing significant damage, especially to a commercial crop, they can then be controlled. So, but it is always good to check on that before you do any kind of treatments or trapping. One of our guests several times commented that poisons can impact raptor populations, and that is something to keep in mind. If you're using any kinds of poisonous baits, you want to make sure you use them properly. And I know that's why you mentioned to hire a pest control person who can do it properly. But do keep in mind, sometimes they don't die in their holes, they wander off, and then they can be eaten by other things, and that can cause secondary damage to other animals. Cats and foxes and raptors can all eat things that are dying.
I'd like to just jump in here, Yvonne.
Yeah.
And say poison is always a poor first choice.
Yes.
Poison ought to be the last place you go. And that, again, it heads right back to the principles of integrated pest management, that you try to find the least damaging yet effective method possible. And with birds, there are other ways before you get down to baiting. So that's it. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, I think that's really important. The comment about integrated pest management is that we try to start with the least toxic possible. The least toxic is usually exclusion, right? Putting up a fence is a lot better than trying to kill something once it's there. So
absolutely. The person that has the espalier fruit trees, man, I feel for you. I don't know how you're going to get rid of squirrels. The only thing I could think of would be if you somehow electrified the fence, and that would be completely impractical with the espalier. So I guess you're going to be sharing some fruit.
One of the other things that I noticed on squirrels was that in my reading, some places mentioned you could do netting or you could also use chicken wire. And once again, that it's going to make your espalier look ugly, but if you want to protect the fruit, that would be a short-term solution until you get the fruit off. But that's a hard one.
Somebody was asking, would removing a 4-inch layer of mulch discourage voles?
Well, I'm not sure the amount. 4 inches sounds like a good amount to clear off. It's worth a try. Would be my answer on that one, because
Voles, yeah, voles don't like being exposed. So I've seen more of a problem when we have things like, you know, on the vineyards, they put those nice little cartons around to protect from sunburn. And when the young vines are out there, that provides a perfect hiding place, keeping the voles safe from predators. And so those kinds of things are a real problem. We see a lot of damage on plants that you know, if you haven't cleared the grasses away from the edges of the trees, they'll have a great hiding place and the predators can't see them because they've got that nice little hiding place. So I think just clearing it back from your plants would probably be the best thing, removing their shelter, their hiding place, because they like to go underneath things that they can. I don't know that they necessarily burrow under mulch, because mulch would be, it wouldn't support tunneling necessarily.
Right.
There's some questions here about, let's see, skunks. I have skunk lights that come on when they detect movement, and that seems to work for some people. I know those the sprayers and the motion sensors sometimes work for people. I don't know about skunks. I know, like you said, some of the animals will get kind of used to those after a while. They'll just go, oh, that's just a light, it won't hurt me. But
Yeah.
Let's see, somebody asked, if you use a mouse trap for a vole, do I need to put bait in it? The cartoons always use a hunk of cheese for mice, but what about a vole?
So I'm not sure exactly what would be attractive, but the things that they nibble on, you know, would probably be good. So we know that they go after the bark. I'm sure if you put some type of a seed on there, that might be helpful. Just it would be the types of things that the vole would eat. With a lot of these, it becomes a trial and error. You try something and see if it works, and if it doesn't, then you go with another edible for them.
Well, you're going to need multiple vole traps anyway, right, Lonnie?
Yeah.
So maybe you could experiment, you know, just use a few different toothsome morsels and see which trap gets sprung first and repeat.
Yeah. And one of the things when I was reading, I noticed that it mentioned that voles like a lot of vegetable things like Brussels sprouts and artichokes, carrots, those types of things. So it seems like you could play around with vegetables and see what vegetables might work the best.
So there's a couple of comments or questions about castor beans, castor bean or castor oil deterring moles or gophers. I haven't ever seen any information about that. And I know that, you know, don't seem to be necessarily deterred by those things, but do you remember reading anything about that?
I saw nothing on the reading about that. The same way that some people would say that you can put garlic in gopher holes, but it's not science. It's, you know, you could try it, but it's certainly not recorded in the readings from the pest notes.
You know, it's fascinating when you start dealing with this topic, the number of anecdotal cures and cure-alls you hear about for various predators. And gosh, you used to see them advertised on late night TV, and you still see some for sale in garden stores. We as master gardeners rely on science-based research, and the science-based research, to the best of my knowledge from what I've read, does not support that as an effective method.
I see that we're at 8 o'clock, but I have a couple more questions, just one or two more questions here. So Those of you that are hanging out with us still, we're going to reach these last 2 questions. Those of you who need to go, thank you for joining us. Do check out our website and the library website for future programs.
And don't forget the survey.
And don't forget the survey, right? So answer our survey when it comes to you in about a month. So the last couple of questions, one is, do voles burrow, or do they instead occupy space between low-growing vegetation, mulch, and the soil?
Well, voles make their burrows, their holes. So I mean, they make it's their homes really, is the voles burrows. I mean, they use that. That's where they live. That's where they sometimes where they rear their young. So if I understand the question correctly, the vole burrow is its home and it's where they live. So yes, they do burrow. They make these runways.
And the last question is, this person has a Christmas tree farm. This year, some of the 3 to 4 year old trees have been damaged at or around the ground level by something that chews through the 1.5 to 3 inch thick bark trunks. Sorry, burrows run out from underneath the damaged trees. What could be causing this damage, and how would you control it?
Ooh, good one. Well, the first thing I'd ask is, are there any signs of either mole mounds or gopher mounds? Are you seeing mounded dirt from an excavation tunnel? If you're seeing mounds, that suggests either a gopher or a mole. Lonnie, what about ground squirrels? Could they be doing that?
Yeah, yeah. And once again, you can see the ground squirrel burrows or runways. And the thing about ground squirrels is that they stay near their burrows. So if you suspect that, look around to see if there are any burrows that might support the ground squirrel, because they don't go too far from their burrows.
So I would say, yeah, it could be. I mean, if it's that much damage, it might be beyond voles. They tend to not quite chew as deeply, but yeah, I would say ground squirrels or gophers could be the culprits. You want to make sure and really identify what it is, though, because both of those are going to be controlled very differently. So make sure you really identify them well before you start taking any kind of control.
So if I had a commercial enterprise and I had a significant infestation of something that was doing that kind of damage to your 3 to 4 year old trees, I'd probably recommend getting a professional out there to find out what your problem is before you lose your crop.
If it was just a few trees, you could probably put some kind of metal, around the base of the tree to protect it. But if it's eating underground is the other idea. If it's might be eating the roots as well as the trunk. So
yeah, I mean, you could try a barrier. You'd have nothing to lose by trying a barrier made out of metal, like a sleeve to protect them, or a mesh to protect them, a steel mesh. But again, if it's below the ground, you've got a problem that a barrier is not going to help with.
I would look at the UC IPM webpage and see if you can recognize some of the characteristics of the different possible culprits.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think there's a couple more comments or questions. Thank you, Master Gardeners. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you, everybody. All right. Sounds like everybody's asked their questions. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Lonnie and Lonnie. And
Thank you, Lon, and happy birthday.
Thank you. We hope you see you all next month.